I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely so much.
Charles sat alone in his private study at Windsor Castle when a palace archivist quietly handed him a heavy envelope, sealed in red wax with the words, "For Charles only." Inside lay the Queen's secret Codicil, a hidden amendment with the power to upend the monarchy itself. As he broke the seal, the weight of centuries pressed down, and the fate of Camilla's titles hung by a thread. What was revealed didn't just challenge tradition. It demanded action that would shock the royal world. So, could this secret change everything? Stay with us, because what unfolded next is staggering. The discovery in Windsor. Windsor Castle was supposed to be in a period of quiet recovery, cataloging archives, securing heirlooms, stabilizing routines after the late Queen's passing. Instead, the calm shattered the moment a junior archivist reported an anomaly. A storage vault whose inventory numbers did not match its physical contents. What should have been a standard count of the late monarch's private belongings suddenly became the trigger for a constitutional crisis. A mahogany case in the personal effects vault was listed as empty, yet it registered weight. When technicians dismantled the inner panel, they uncovered a concealed compartment that did not appear anywhere in the estate's schematics. Inside, it rested a lone envelope, the paper slightly yellowed, the edges pressed flat as if deliberately untouched for months. It was carried to the king's study immediately. There was nothing ornate about it. No ribbon, no flourish, only a wax seal marked with Elizabeth II's private signet, the emblem she used exclusively for correspondence, meant to bypass governmental eyes. 3 handwritten words cut through the surface like a verdict, "For Charles only." The archivist who delivered it later remarked that the king went still before even lifting the envelope, as though he already sensed whatever waited inside would alter the balance of his reign. The seal cracked, and lavender, Elizabeth's trademark stationery scent, rose faintly from the parchment. The document inside was not sentimental, ceremonial, nor affectionate. It was a codicil, an amendment executed in her final weeks, clearly drafted for a future emergency. The language was clinical and absolute. It identified specific property not to be handled or worn without authorization, including the Vladimir tiara, the Cambridge emeralds, and private correspondence intended for the Princess of Wales. By Elizabeth's own directive, if those boundaries were violated, the monarch was granted immediate authority to remove a consort's privileges and status, including title. No council vote. No parliamentary procedure. The power sat with the crown alone. Charles reread the lines, realizing this document did not merely adjust the will, it overrode it. It was a legal tripwire set by a queen who feared the wrong hands might one day reach too far. Someone already had. And the moment he understood that, the future of his marriage and the monarchy began to tilt. But if a crown can be erased with a single signature, what else could fall next? Keep watching to find out. The clause that makes Camilla's title conditional. Charles had expected grief, guidance, perhaps even a final reassurance from his mother. What he found instead was a document written with the tone of a sovereign preparing for insubordination. The codicil didn't resemble a message between parent and child. It looked like a legal instrument crafted to detonate only if someone inside the family crossed an invisible line. There was no sentiment, no farewell, no reflection, only conditions, authority, and consequences. It was the closest thing to a constitutional weapon Elizabeth II could leave behind. The central paragraph hit like a hammer. It stated that the title of Queen Consort was not an inheritance of marriage, but a conditional privilege dependent on behavior. A consort could hold the style only so long as they respected the boundaries around royal property. should they remove, assume ownership of, or publicly display any item held in the private inventory of the Crown without express sanction, the reigning monarch would be empowered to revoke privileges without a council vote or parliamentary consultation. The Codicil placed the execution of that authority entirely in the king's hands. It was a power that bypassed tradition and precedent, and it was written in a language that left nothing open to interpretation. What unsettled Charles most was how specific the protected items were. The document referenced the Vladimir tiara and the Cambridge emeralds not as jewelry, but as instruments of state identity. It referenced private correspondence to the Princess of Wales not as sentimental letters, but as dynastic continuity. These pieces were named as boundaries no consort could cross without challenging the monarchy's core. They were the late Queen's markers of succession, physical tokens that silently announced who the Crown trusted to carry its future. And Charles knew exactly who had touched them. He had seen Camilla wearing emeralds that were never hers. He had heard Anne describe the tiara moved from the vault. He had just learned Catherine never received the letter that was meant for her. Every violation listed in the Codicil had already happened. One phrase kept echoing through his mind: misappropriation and disrespect. Elizabeth hadn't feared a political coup. She had feared entitlement, the possibility that someone would step into royal space and treat inheritance like loot. She had not trusted affection to protect the crown. She had trusted law. Charles set the document down, hands unsteady. It was no longer theoretical. The Codicil was active the moment those boundaries were crossed, and Camilla had crossed every one of them. But if every boundary has already been broken, what comes next for the crown? Keep watching to find out. The royal vault has been violated. Evidence, not rumor. That was how Princess Anne chose to begin. When she arrived in Charles's study at Windsor, she didn't waste time with speculation or sympathy. She laid out the facts like an officer reporting to a commanding officer. According to her inspection of the vault, the problem wasn't a clerical error or a misfiled case. It was a breach. Items that were supposed to be sealed in the royal jewelry inventory were gone. Not loaned, not reassigned. Gone. The Vladimir Emerald Suite was missing. The Cambridge emeralds were no longer in their designated case. The specialist cataloging notes for both entries had been altered by a hand that didn't belong to the archivist assigned to the vault. Staff were frightened to speak at first. Some looked physically ill when Anne questioned them. Eventually, a pattern of whispered admissions emerged. Camilla had entered the vault more than once, and she had not come alone. She brought members of her personal household staff, not individuals authorized to handle historical regalia. When challenged, she allegedly dismissed the concern with offhand authority, claiming that if she wore the jewels publicly, it would strengthen the imagery of the monarchy. To the custodians, it sounded less like justification and more like rehearsal, an excuse prepared long before anyone asked. Anne recounted a confrontation that became the turning point. She found Camilla leaving her private quarters, draped in emeralds that did not belong to her, wearing them as casually as costume pieces. Anne told her the pieces were designated for Catherine's future role, safeguarded by the late Queen's instruction. Instead of denial, Camilla reportedly smirked, adjusting a brooch that wasn't hers, and replied, "Possession is 9/10 of the law, isn't it?" It was not a joke. It was a declaration, a claim of ownership through proximity, a belief that wearing the crown's history made it hers. That was the moment Anne understood this wasn't about vanity. It was about power. For Charles, the details Anne delivered marked the moment loyalty fractured. Until now, the tension around Camilla's behavior could be rationalized. Miscommunication, insecurity, overconfidence. But this was different. Entering a restricted vault, relocating heritage jewels, intercepting items meant for the Princess of Wales. Those were actions with consequences defined in the Codicil. The significance struck him like an impact. The very violations his mother predicted had already happened. And if the codicil was designed as a tripwire, then Camilla had already stepped on it. The room fell silent. The threshold had been crossed. What followed would no longer be emotional. It would be constitutional. But if the tripwire has already been triggered, what happens when William himself steps into the room? Let's find out. William arrives, the Air Forces, the line in the sand. The storm broke the moment the helicopter blades cut through the Windsor air. William did not arrive as a supportive son. He arrived as the future king summoned to contain a threat inside the walls of his own family. His stride through the corridors was fast, focused. No aides, no small talk, no ritual bowing. The guards stepped aside instinctively. He already knew why he had been called. Staff loyal to the Wales household had passed word to Kensington. Jewels were moved, and a letter meant for Catherine had been intercepted. When William entered the king's study, he didn't look confused. He looked furious. Anne stood near the window, arms folded, watching history shift in real time. Charles held the codicil in one hand, gripping it like a burning coal he didn't know how to drop. He tried to speak, but William raised a hand, not out of disrespect, but because he needed to make his case before emotion softened the edge. He took the document from his father and scanned the text rapidly. The clause about unauthorized possession, the explicit reference to jewels designated for the Princess of Wales, the section naming private correspondence. The intent was unmistakable. Elizabeth II had foreseen manipulation through access and had left a direct mechanism to stop it. William's voice dropped into a tone rarely heard outside military briefings. "She has crossed every boundary Mother set, every single one." He revealed what hurt the most. Catherine believed the late queen had not left her a message. She had wondered if she had disappointed her. But now they knew the truth. The letter existed, and someone chose to keep it from her. For William, it wasn't just a stolen note. It was the deliberate erasure of his wife's place in the monarchy. It was sabotage. Then came the ultimatum. Quiet, devastating, and absolute. William leaned forward, eyes fixed on his father, and drew the line no one had dared mark before. You can have Camilla, or you can have the monarchy, but you cannot have both. The weight of those words was constitutional. Charles understood immediately. Without the Prince and Princess of Wales, the monarchy would lose its future, its legitimacy, and its public support. And for the first time, the king realized the crown might demand a sacrifice he never imagined he would make. But if one letter could shatter a family, what happens when Meghan's name enters the room? Stay with us to see the fallout. The interception of Meghan's letter. The scandal no longer ended with Catherine. It widened, unexpectedly, violently, when a second envelope surfaced, this time not from Windsor, but from across the Atlantic. During a secondary search of Camilla's private sitting room, a cream-colored letter was discovered wedged behind a row of history books. It bore a Californian return address, and the handwriting was unmistakable. Meghan Markle. The date on the envelope placed it just weeks before Queen Elizabeth II, seconds passing. It had been opened, read, and then hidden, not misplaced, hidden. Charles read it slowly. The language wasn't confrontational. It wasn't political. It was an olive branch. Meghan had asked for a private audience with the late Queen, without cameras, without press, without intermediaries. She requested the chance for Archie and Lilibet to see their great-grandmother while there was still time. The letter spoke of reconciliation, of peace, and of trying again before history hardened into regret. But that opportunity never reached Elizabeth II. Instead, it had been intercepted. filed away with the intent to silence it. Camilla, in her position as gatekeeper of the king's private household, had the authority to control who accessed the monarch, and she had used that access to close doors instead of opening them. The implication was devastating. If the Queen never saw the letter, then every accusation of emotional distance between the Sussexes and the institution was sitting on a lie. Every tabloid headline about Meghan refusing to reach out. Every assumption that Harry cut ties entirely, built on a foundation that had been engineered. William said it plainly. She didn't just hide a letter, she hid a chance for peace. Anne described what staff had been too afraid to admit earlier. Camilla controlled the diary, the access, and the silence. She approved meeting requests. She decided which communications reached the monarch. If a relationship threatened her influence, she found a way to suffocate it under the guise of protecting the king's well-being. That meant Meghan's request for dialogue wasn't denied by the Queen. It was blocked before it ever reached her. For Charles, this revelation cut deeper than the missing jewels. The emeralds were theft. The intercepted message was manipulation. The jewels damaged heritage. The letter damaged blood. In that moment, surrounded by evidence stolen from 2 generations of women, Charles finally understood. Camilla had not only crossed boundaries of property, she had crossed boundaries of family. And that was something the Codicil was designed to answer. Charles confronts Camilla. There was no shouting, no throne-top drama, no theatrical displays of rage. When Camilla stepped into the king's private library at Windsor, the atmosphere was already sealed like a courtroom. Charles gave a quiet instruction to the guards. "Close the door." A second command followed. "Lock it." The metallic click that echoed through the room wasn't anger. It was a verdict being prepared. Camilla tried to bring familiarity into the moment. Soft tone, softened expression, the language of a spouse rather than a consort facing judgment. She gestured toward the documents on the desk, insisting everything she had done, including entering the vault and handling the jewels, was for the image of the monarchy, to support Charles in a moment of transition when the world needed a queen beside him. She framed it as initiative, not intrusion, loyalty, not possession. But the room did not soften. No one moved. Princess Anne watched with the stillness of a witness. William stood near the fireplace, jaw clenched, refusing eye contact. Charles slid the codicil across the desk toward her. The parchment stopped inches from her hand. No explanation, no preface, just the document that changed everything. When she finally looked at the text, her posture changed. Her eyes drifted over the clauses naming the jewels she had worn, the private letters she had hidden, the precise boundaries she had crossed. She stopped breathing when she reached the line confirming that a consort's authority was conditional, revocable, at the king's discretion. This was not a marital dispute. This was a constitutional mechanism being activated. She reached for justification again, insisting the emeralds needed to be seen publicly, that Catherine wasn't ready, that the letter to Meghan would have caused distress. She called her decisions protective. William answered evenly, voice low but final. You weren't protecting the monarchy. You were protecting your position within it. The silence after that sentence was the breaking point. Charles's voice remained steady, but his hands trembled as he spoke. "This is not about embarrassment or scandal," he said. "This is about violation. The crown cannot survive a queen consort who treats its history as possession." The king did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Power did the speaking. Camilla finally understood. This was not a fight she could win, talk her way out of, or charm into remission. This was a legal end, a constitutional execution delivered quietly, with the weight of a monarch, not a husband, closing the door behind it. So if dignity is the condition, what happens when Camilla fails the test? Keep watching to see the consequences begin. The legal strike. There was nothing dramatic about what came next. No raised voices, no emotional collapse. Only the cold language of bureaucracy taking the place where affection used to live. Once the confrontation ended, Charles summoned his legal advisors, not to ask if the codicil could be enforced, but how quickly. The lawyers reviewed the Queen's amendment in silence, moving line by line until they reached the clause that mattered most. A consort's title existed only as long as the dignity of the crown remained intact. A conditional title meant a removable title. It was that simple, that was brutal. The lawyers confirmed what the codicil implied. Stripping Camilla of her style and privileges did not require parliamentary intervention or public messaging. It required the monarch's consent and his signature. It was not a divorce. That would be a civil matter requiring time and negotiation. This was something sharper, the removal of queenly status while the marriage technically remained, at least on paper, a separation of identity, not yet of union. In practice, Camilla would remain his wife. In governance, she would no longer be his queen. Once the order was drafted, the transformation happened quickly. Her household was dissolved before lunchtime. The Queen Consort cipher was pulled from office stationery. Internal correspondence received a new directive. The style, Her Majesty, was no longer to be applied to Camilla in palace documents, memos, or scheduling records. Staff were instructed to refer to her by name only. In the language of the institution, that was exile. The removal of a title is not done with ceremony. It is done with silence. Charles signed the order alone. He did not announce it, and he did not justify it. The signature was the justification. Outside his study, the decision spread through the palace like a change in air pressure. Subtle, but unmistakable. People who once curtsied at the mention of her name no longer did. Her place in the structure had collapsed. In the end, it was not rage that took Camilla's crown. It was a survival instinct. The House of Windsor had been faced with a choice: protect the marriage or protect the monarchy. And for the first time in Charles's life, the crown came before the heart. So if exile begins in silence, what happens when Operation Erasure goes public? Stay with us. Operation Erasure. The firm does not destroy a public figure with scandal or spectacle. It destroys them with silence. By the time the confrontation ended, Operation Erasure was already in motion. There was no announcement, no press release. Instead, Camilla was moved to Ray Mill House, the residence she owned privately, on the pretext of rest and privacy. Inside the palace, everyone understood what that truly meant. She was being removed from the board without the public realizing the game had changed. Within hours, her presence vanished from the machinery of monarchy. The royal schedule was rewritten so quietly that even seasoned aides had to double-check the updated logs. Engagements that were once hers were reassigned to Princess Anne or Catherine. Correspondence that used to arrive in her inbox was redirected to other offices. The cipher she shared with the king, two entwined letters meant to symbolize partnership, was stripped from stationery, invitations, and draft speeches. It was replaced by the king's single initial, a visual declaration that she no longer stood beside him. The most symbolic step was the recovery of the jewelry. Anne refused to delegate the task. She arrived at Ray Mill House herself, with the royal jeweler and an inventory list. The Vladimir tiara was returned first, lifted from its display stand and placed back into its velvet case. The Cambridge emeralds followed, gathered piece by piece, some still laid out as if Camilla planned to wear them again. The Queen Mother's pearls were the last to go, and when Anne closed the case, there was no anger in her expression, only finality. The jewels didn't need words. Their removal spoke for the institution. Back at Mill House, Camilla watched the news from the isolation of her sitting room. No scandals, no condemnations, just images of Charles returning to duty. Alone. Anne is performing engagements with military precision. Catherine is stepping into high-profile roles with serene confidence. The palace didn't need to say she was gone. It only needed to move on without her. That was the quiet brutality of Operation Erasure, a queen unmade not by accusation, but by absence. The crown had closed its doors, and this time they would not reopen. So if the jewels are back where they belong, what changes when Catherine steps into the light? Don't blink. Catherine takes the stage. The firm did not issue a statement, hold a briefing, or clarify why the queen consort was suddenly absent. It did something far more calculated. It used symbolism. At the annual diplomatic reception at Buckingham Palace, a night designed for international scrutiny, Catherine was chosen to step into the space Camilla once occupied. There was no introduction, no declaration of changed roles. The palace understood that power, when handled correctly, doesn't need narration. It only needs to be seen. When the doors to the ballroom opened, the cameras clicked before anyone could speak. The Princess of Wales entered on Charles's right, not behind him. She didn't need a title to signal authority. The crown did it for her. Resting on her head was the Grand Duchess Vladimir tiara, a piece historically reserved for women who defined rather than inherited influence. Around her was the deep green shimmer of the Cambridge emeralds, the very jewels the Codicil named as protected, and the very set Camilla had mishandled. The message was unmistakable. The future of the monarchy had a new female center of gravity, and it wasn't hidden in Mill House. It was standing in Buckingham Palace under the chandeliers. There was no need for a press officer to whisper context. For diplomats and foreign royals who understood royal language, the jewels did all the talking. The emeralds had been intended for the next queen. Now they were displayed exactly as Elizabeth II had envisioned. Cameras captured not fashion, but succession. Not aesthetic, but authority. Catherine wasn't replacing Camilla with words. She was replacing her with legitimacy. Charles walked with composed dignity, but anyone who watched closely could see the shift. He did not guide Catherine forward. She held her own space, aligned with him, stepping into visibility as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire marriage. Anne watched from a measured distance, face unreadable, but her presence confirmed what insiders already knew. This was not improvisation. This was coordination. At Mill House, Camilla saw the event on television. She watched the tiara flash beneath the chandeliers. She watched the emeralds shine under the camera lights. She watched as Catherine received international guests, with the grace of someone not auditioning for the role of future queen, but inhabiting it. And she finally understood. She hadn't just lost jewels. She had lost the narrative, the proximity, the legitimacy. The title had been removed quietly. The spotlight confirmed it publicly. The House of Windsor had not replaced a queen with a scandal. It had replaced her with symbolism. And symbolism, in the monarchy, is law. The public message with no words. Silence became the palace's final weapon. No press conference, no dramatic address from the balcony, just a carefully worded statement released at 8 a.m. to every newsroom in Britain. The former queen consort had entered a phase of permanent withdrawal from public duties for private recuperation. To the uninformed, it looked like a health break. To those who understand the monarchy's coded language, it was unmistakable. Permanent withdrawal meant removal. Private recuperation meant exile. The title was gone. The role had been retired without ever admitting it was taken. The message said nothing, and yet it told the world everything. Inside Windsor, Charles completed the final step. The papers were ready, authorizing the revocation of rank, official duties, and household authority. Not a divorce, not yet, but the constitutional dismantling of a crown beside his own. One signature, the same pen that signed his accession, formally ended Camilla's reign. Her Majesty would no longer appear in internal documents. Chairs once reserved for her at state events were reallocated. Her household offices dissolved. Titles can be taken loudly, but history prefers when they vanish quietly. Later that week, the world saw the first visual confirmation. At a scheduled appearance, Charles walked from Windsor to the waiting cars, flanked by Princess Anne at his right, William and Catherine just behind. Reporters shouted Camilla's name, but no answer came. Cameras rolled, searching for the familiar figure at the king's side. But that position was empty. She had not disappeared. She had been removed. And the monarchy was already adjusting to the space she left. No announcement of a fall. No declaration of an end. Just a kingdom continuing forward without her. Proof that sometimes the crown's sharpest tool is the power to say nothing at all. So what do you think? Was Charles defending the crown's survival or executing a ruthless power play for control? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to comment, share, and subscribe.